If you have ever experienced the roller coaster ride of yo-yo dieting, gaining, losing, and gaining it all back, plus more again and again, you won't want to miss a second of this episode. My guest, Drew Manning, is here to share his story of intentionally gaining 75 pounds twice as an experiment in his 30s and then again in his 40s so he could better understand the real struggles his coaching clients experience trying to make dramatic nutritional and lifestyle changes. What he discovered will surprise and shock you. Drew is a New York Times best-selling author of the book Fit to Fat to Fit and Complete Keto, and he's also the creator of the hit TV show Fit to Fat to Fit. Drew has been featured on many TV shows such as The Tonight Show, Dr. Oz, Good Morning America, The View, and many more. I am so excited to share his journey with you. So buckle up and get ready to find out how good it can get, because we are about to find out. Hi, Drew. It's so nice to have you on the show. Thank you for being here. I know you have a very interesting and unique story that intrigued me actually quite a while ago, a few years ago, when I saw that you had done a reverse transformation. So you had gone from being very fit to the opposite. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so it's called Fit to Fat to Fit. This is something that I came up with back in 2011. So this is like 12 years ago. And, I grew up my entire life in shape. I was always, the fit guy. I played football and wrestling. I grew up in a family of 11 brothers and sisters. So we all were very active and we played sports. And so for me, all I ever knew was being fit came kind of easy for me. And fast forward to 2009, I became a personal trainer. Here I was, someone who had never been overweight a day in my life, trying to help people who were overweight pretty much every day of their life. And there was an obvious disconnect. I couldn't understand why it was so hard for them and why it was so easy for me. So I went on this journey. This idea popped up in my head like, okay, well, what if you got fat on purpose to gain a better understanding of what it was like to be overweight for the first time? And for some reason, the idea made sense. It almost felt like a calling for me to do this crazy experiment. And so I decided to start a YouTube channel, a website, and I decided to document my journey of intentionally gaining weight by no exercise. So I couldn't exercise for 6 months. And I wanted to focus on the standard American diet. We've all seen Super Size Me. We all know fast food is bad for us. But I wanted to focus on your typical everyday American foods that are highly processed, that are cheap and affordable and super convenient. And let's be honest, they taste really, really good. That's the type of food that I ate for 6 months straight, gained 75 pounds of pure fat in those 6 months. I was truly humbled. It was way harder than I thought it would be. And I think that's why it caught on. That's why it went viral. Went on a bunch of TV shows and, wrote a book about the experience. And a TV show was made out of this whole movement. Luckily, I got back to fit, which is why it's called Fit to Fat to Fit. And that's the story in a nutshell, but there's obviously a lot more to it.
Yeah, no, I want to dive into that because 99% of us, including me, are trying to do the opposite, right? I want to hear about what that felt like, right? So what did you find challenging about gaining weight or getting out of shape? Like, what did that actually take to achieve that?
So the gaining weight process was kind of, there was some duality to it, meaning like it was hard, but it was also easy. And what I mean by that is, yes, the food tasted really good. It was really fun at first. I'll be honest with you. It was like a kid in a candy store, being able to eat whatever you want, whenever you want, and how much of it you wanted to eat. Like the sky was the limit. So there's like this sense of freedom going into the grocery store, skipping the produce section, going down the cereal aisle and the cookies and the chips and the crackers, and like the frozen food section. Like we have an abundance of options here in America of 50 different flavors of cereal and 100 different flavors of soda to choose from, and it was kind of exciting. And yeah, at first the food was amazing and it tasted good. But very quickly you start to notice a difference in your health. Like, for example, I started snoring pretty quickly. My wife at the time noticed that and pointed that out to me. Walking up and down the stairs, I started to get, winded. Bending over to tie my shoes with all that visceral fat surrounding my organs made it harder to breathe. And so I remember having to bend over and tie my shoes and hold my breath and then come up for air as I was tying my shoes or clipping my toenails. There was little physical things that were definitely hard. I would say the hardest part of it was the mental and emotional challenges, because up until that point, I had built up an identity in my mind that I was my body. My body image was my self-image. I think a lot of people get stuck in this mindset of I am my body. And so when I was even 10 or 20 pounds overweight, I kind of freaked out. I had an identity crisis and I wanted to go up to strangers in public and explain to them that I wasn't really overweight, that this is just an experiment and that I normally don't look like this. And I wanted to let people know that I wasn't really this overweight person, because I was so uncomfortable being overweight for the first time, and it truly humbled me. There was a lot of ups and downs throughout the journey of physical changes, being bigger, but I would say the hardest part for me that first time around was very self-conscious, and I didn't want to take my shirt off. I, struggled with intimacy with my wife at the time because I didn't want her to see me naked. I was ashamed. I was very uncomfortable. And yeah, you just feel lethargic, this lack of energy. I had 2 little kids at the time that were 2 years old and a newborn. So you have to expend a lot of energy as a new parent, trying to keep up with your kids. But it was a very humbling, eye-opening experience that taught me how wrong I was. I finally realized just how wrong and judgmental I was in my approach to helping people. I used to think it was so easy. It's just a matter of willpower. You just put down the junk food, you go to the gym. And I can honestly say from this experience, it taught me a lot of empathy. And I have so much respect and empathy now for people that struggle with food addictions and emotional eating. And, it's way harder than people think. And I'll be the first to tell people that think it's easy. It's not easy. And it's just like overcoming any kind of drug addiction, in my opinion, except I think food addiction is harder because food is legal and we need it to survive, and that everyone eats the food. But people that want to lose weight have to be disciplined and, consistent. So it's tied to our emotions more than we think it is. The emotional connection to food is a lot more powerful than we think it is. And those are just some of the lessons that I learned and how hard this experience was for me.
Yeah, I've always find it odd when people say, the term emotional eating, right? That's a big term from my own experience, because I was identified as an emotional eater when I ballooned up to 210 and I'm 5'3". Wow. So when I realized that, I was I thought about it a lot, and I understand that it is, I believe, all eating is emotional, right? But there's a difference between food addiction and emotional eating, right? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's different for each person. For example, me, I could eat cake and be totally fine having one slice of cake. There are other people who literally, if they have one slice of cake, they will lead to 2 or 3, lead to binge eating. Kind of like people who can drink alcohol. There are people who can have one beer, be totally fine, or one glass of wine and know how to shut it off. There are other people who know that that's a trigger for them. And if they have one glass, then it's lights out. They just keep going and going and going until they black out. And so it's different for each person. And so it's not the same for all of us. But I will say this about emotional eating. I think, from a biological perspective, I think we're hardwired to seek food because we're human beings and we need, food to survive. So there's a biological aspect to food. I think in the day and age we live in now, it is more closely tied to our emotions because of what the types of foods that we have now. We have so much good, delicious food that, is hyper palatable, like these highly processed junk foods that are available in the grocery stores that are subsidized by our government to make as cheap as possible. And these companies spend millions of dollars on research to figure out the perfect combinations of flavors and colors and textures of the food to find out what's going to be the most addictive to the human brain. So you can't deny that these companies spend this type of money to figure out how many bites of crunchiness it takes for the human brain to get addicted to the perfect potato chip, for example. I mean, if you look into the stuff, that it's insane what we know how to hack the human brain. But here's the problem with humans is that we are emotional creatures and we look for ways to escape our pain. And some people gravitate towards substances like food, drugs, and alcohol to numb the pain, the emotional pains of life. So if you're going through a divorce, a breakup, financial issues, abuse, trauma, whatever it is, there's a lot of ways to escape. And some of those ways are less healthier than others. Like if you become addicted to drugs to escape the pains of life, that can lead to a serious drug addiction where, I mean, to overcome that is one of the hardest things, imaginable. But also food addiction, if that becomes your drug, it's the same kind of thing where if you, from the young age of let's say 8 or 10, you have some trauma or abuse that happens and you find food as a comfort drug. It numbs the pain, it distracts you from the pain. And you do that day after day, year after year, decade after decade. And then now you're 30, 40 years old and you're like, okay, I'm not going to eat any more sugar. I'm not going to eat any more junk food. And you're trying to willpower your way out of it. Your body kind of fights back with these withdrawal symptoms of wanting the high that it gets from these foods. And so it creates this vicious cycle of dependency, just like any other drug addict would have. And I think that's where most people fall into that category, who are food addicts or who are emotional eaters, because they programmed their brain for years and decades to react to stress a certain way. And now that they're trying to get out of it and change, it's really hard to willpower your way out of addiction that's that deep and ingrained in our programming. And that's why I have so much empathy for people that struggle, because some people that think it's easy. It's just don't eat the junk food. Don't be lazy. Just eat healthy food. That's like telling a drug addict, just don't do drugs. It's not that hard. You just don't do it, right? It lacks empathy and understanding. And there's a good quote that I love by Teddy Roosevelt. He says, "No one cares how much you know till they know how much you care." So if any of you are struggling with food addiction or emotional eating and you just can't get out of it, I think most people want to feel understood first instead of judged. And if you try and shame someone into eating less or shaming them to look a certain way, that doesn't last forever. It doesn't feel good about that person doesn't feel good about themselves if it's coming from a place of judgment and lack of understanding and empathy. This is why I'm such a big proponent of empathy as a catalyst to change.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that all of the diets out there right now, and a lot of us are serial dieters. And I have this firm belief that the more you diet, the more weight you gain. And what I noticed in my past was I would gain the most weight right before and right after a diet, because the willpower only took you so far, right?
Yeah.
You could kind of white knuckle it for a while, but then as soon as the diet was over or right before I would start a diet, it would be a free for all, right? It was oh, this punishment is coming on January 1st. I'm just going to eat everything I can eat because my diet is starting, on this date.
Yep.
And then right after the diet, it's there are no real tools. And nobody really teaches us about reverse dieting or the right healthy habits to keep going, or how to, in my case, it was macros that got me out of obesity. But I'm curious, what did you find the most challenging when you were ready to start losing the weight?
Yeah, so my first experience, after gaining the 75 pounds in 6 months, then it was the journey back to fit. The thing that was most surprising to me was how my own body, as a personal trainer, as a fit person, those first 2 weeks of going from 5,000 calories of Cinnamon Toast Crunch and macaroni and cheese and Hot Pockets and all the delicious food that I ate, to then going to 2,000 calories of real whole foods, I never, like, it sucked so bad. It was literally hell for about 2 weeks. And what the reason I say that is because the food didn't taste nearly as good as I remember. So my taste buds adapted to the hyper palatable, highly processed junk foods. And going to eating chicken and broccoli, like, it doesn't release the same amount of dopamine in your brain when you eat Cinnamon Toast Crunch or something delicious. And so your body goes through these withdrawal symptoms. And I was shocked. I was surprised because here I was, a proponent of health, thinking, oh, it's going to be so easy. My body's going to bounce right back. I'll lose all the weight the first 30 days. I'll get ripped. But my body, those first 2 weeks, fought back against me. Like, I had headaches. I was grumpy. I was moody. I was starving all the time. The food didn't taste nearly as good. And but a light bulb went off for me. Like, I was genuinely shocked at how my body fought back against what I was trying to give it, because it got so used to and accustomed to the high that it had from those foods, that even I was like, wow, this must be so hard because for people that struggle. Because I remember giving clients a meal plan and saying, okay, here's your meal plan. You just follow the meal plan. You just do it, right? And they would struggle. They'd be like, oh, I tried it for a week and then I gave in this weekend and something happened and I added my soda. And I'm like, well, why don't you just do it? And this was the first experience where a light bulb went off. Like, oh, this is what my clients are feeling. This is what they're experiencing when I tell them to follow a meal plan, and their bodies are just constantly reminding them and tempting them to be like, hey, we don't want this. We want the high. And so your body, it's weird. You have to get over this hump. It lasts about 2 to 3 weeks for your body to adjust. Just like any kind of I'm not comparing it to drugs, but what I'm saying is, there is a type of withdrawal symptom that I felt and I experienced when I stopped eating the processed junk food. And that really opened my eyes and helped me empathize with people that struggle, because it can be an addiction. And that is a biological thing where your body is wired to seek the comfort of, or the high that it gets from the highly processed junk foods. And this is why so many people struggle, because if broccoli and kale and spinach like tasted delicious and made you feel good, like a dopamine hit, like when you eat ice cream, of course, it would be easy to stay consistent eating healthy foods, but you don't get the same chemical reaction with those foods that you would with the highly processed junk foods. And that's why a lot of people struggle, because of the dopamine that's released when we're about to eat this delicious, junk food that we've had for decades. It's really hard to break that cycle. And it takes a lot of, not just because willpower doesn't work. We talked about willpower. There's a good book called Willpower Doesn't Work by Benjamin Hardy. It's a really good book if you want to understand how willpower doesn't work for most people, and some methods and strategies to not have to rely on your willpower muscle to get yourself out of these addictions. There's other approaches to freeing yourself from these addictions. But it's a journey, and this is kind of what I coach people through now, is more so helping them through the mental and emotional struggles versus just, hey, just do it. And just like willpower your way out of this addiction. It just doesn't work. So this is why, after having done Fit to Fat Fit twice now, I can speak to the mental and emotional struggles that people, that really keep them from living a healthy lifestyle. And it's not what you think it is. It's not like these people just lack willpower. It's deep, complicated psychological issues that people have that stem from things like trauma or abuse, or stuff from our childhoods that haven't been processed or worked through yet, maybe with a licensed therapist or a life coach or someone that can help you release these patterns that have developed, these reactions to certain stressors or triggers in our life that cause us to reach for the food in the first place. There's a good quote by Anthony DeMello. He says, what you're aware of, you're in control of, and what you're not aware of is in control of you. And so the first step to overcoming addiction is self-awareness. And that's where it starts, is becoming aware of why you are the way you are and why you do what you do and why you react the way you react to certain stimulus, and understanding where that first comes from. And so that it's a deep dive into doing the inner work versus just working out just to get put past it. So that's kind of what I focus on now.
100% agreed. I mean, it's very interesting because you'd never really kind of understand it unless you've gone through it. But what I was surprised by as I was dropping weight is every layer that came off brought out it's almost like the memories or those feelings were stored somewhere in the body, and then as the weight was coming off, they were getting tripped up and they were just coming up. And I had to deal with it at the time it was happening, or reach for the numbing effect, which it could have been alcohol, right? In my case, it was alcohol, cigarettes, food, like you name it, right? Anything not to deal with whatever it was that I had to deal with that was coming up for me. Did you at any point think like, oh shit, I'm not going to lose this weight?
Yeah, there was when I was on Dr. Oz, which was towards the end of my journey. So I was like 70 plus pounds overweight. And he was going through my blood work. He was going through like how unhealthy this was for my body. I had some doubts because I've never put my body in this situation, and I didn't know how my body would react. Like, what if I got stuck like this? Like, what if I couldn't lose the weight? I definitely had my doubts. I was 31 years old at the time. And, eventually I had to let go of that fear because it's just a story that I was telling myself, and I just had to trust the process. And I was like, okay, I put myself in this situation. This is an experiment I chose to do, and I've lived with the consequences. But I'm going to try my best effort to live the lifestyle I know works for me to get back into a healthy, fit body. And luckily it did work out. But yeah, there was times where I doubted and feared, like, what if I'm stuck like this? And, I would have had to live with that. It would be a very interesting story if I got stuck like that. But, luckily, I did get back to fit. So
that's like a recurring nightmare for me. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and be like, oh, wow, that was a dream. I didn't actually drop the weight. It's a scary thing. So tell me some of the challenges that you faced from like just going through this, right? So like the weight loss journey itself, like how did that feel to you?
Yeah, the weight loss journey was way harder than I thought it would be. I kind of compare it to, my whole life I was kind of on top of this mountain of fitness, like as a trainer, as a fit person who's just kind of like, I worked hard to get there, of course, as a kid. I did football and wrestling. But then after that, I just kind of like to maintain that was pretty easy for me. It's comfortable. It was a comfortable discomfort for me. But coming down to the bottom of the mountain and starting from like where I was starting, and that climb back up was such a humbling and enlightening experience for me that, one, it taught me a lot of empathy and respect, and it helped me understand the struggle of getting back to the top. Like, even though I was able to, because of things like muscle memory, and I had the discipline and knowledge as a trainer. So my journey back up was completely different than someone who's been overweight for years or who's been overweight their entire life and has never worked out before. Like that, like it's not even, I can't even compare the two. Like mine was just a little glimpse into how hard it can be for a lot of people. But yeah, like there was weeks where I hit plateaus. There was weeks where I didn't lose any weight. And there was weeks where I actually gained weight. And here I was, this personal trainer that knew how to do all the things, but I still like jumping on the scale. It's not guaranteed to, you're not guaranteed to have weight loss every single week. It's not a linear process of like, if I do X, Y, and Z, eat this many calories, do this amount of workout, then the weight loss looks perfectly, like a downhill slope like this. It's all over the place, up and down, and it messes with people's heads psychologically because you're jumping on a scale, once a week, and sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Then you define yourself by that, like your success. If it goes down, I'm successful. If it goes up or stays the same, I'm a failure. And this is why I have such an issue with the scale, because I don't think it's a good form of measurement for a lot of people, because it messes with their head and they place too much value on that number. And if you were to step on that scale 10 times a day, you would get 10 different readings and numbers because weight is so variable. There's so many factors that could factor in. It's not just, fat loss that's showing up on the scale. It's water retention, it's hormones, there's a lot of different factors, for a lot of people when they step on the scale. So, there was a lot of challenges like that. I had one, being patient with yourself and your body and understanding that this is like, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? There is no finish line. And that's the problem that people have. You mentioned this in the beginning of this on or off mentality. Like I'm on my diet or I'm off my diet. And if I'm off my diet, then I go the opposite direction to this extreme. When I'm on my diet, I go to this extreme. There's no in between. There's no dimmer switch mentality, if you will. It's just on, off, and it's either, this extreme or that extreme. And I think people need to understand that it doesn't have to be the extreme. Like you can have this dimmer switch mentality where it's always on, but maybe for the weekend, you go to Italy and you have some pasta and you have some pizza with your lover, whoever it is, and you just enjoy life. And then the next, you get back on a Monday and you're like, all right, go back to my lifestyle of like eating healthy food and exercising because it feels good. So, there's a lot of challenges, from both of my experiments because I did it again in 2020 as a 40-year-old. There was a lot of different challenges from both experiences, but they both taught me a lot about the psychology behind why people become obese and why they stay obese and why, a lot of people get stuck in that vicious cycle.
So tell me about the difference between when you did it in your 30s and then when you did it again in your 40s.
So when I did in my 30s, your metabolism is different, different hormone levels, different place in my life. And that was my first experience being overweight. Fast forward to when I did it in 2020, a lot had happened. I went through a divorce, which was a rock bottom moment for me. I left my religion at the same time. So that was a huge identity crisis. So I was a single dad the second time around. I had a girlfriend at the time, so I was in a relationship. My daughters were a lot older and more aware and understanding of what was happening. So that was a whole different difficulty to navigate with them being older and wanting the same food I was eating, But I went through a really bad breakup with my girlfriend in the middle of my journey as a 40-year-old. And that really threw me for a loop because I really understood emotional eating at a deeper level. Because when you feel sad and lonely and depressed, like most people do after a breakup, the food really did become my comfort. And it really did make me feel better temporarily. I'm like, oh, this is what it feels like to numb like your emotions with the food. Because before I was eating the food because it tasted good and I was doing it as an experiment. But I realized, man, I could escape those pains, those emotional pains with the breakup, with the wine and with some Ben and Jerry's and some, brownies or something like that. And you do temporarily feel better, but then it wears off and you go back to escaping it again. So I understood emotional eating on even a deeper level. But the differences between the two were, yes, I was older. I turned 40 when I did the second time around. Different metabolism, different, set of hormones. So like I had a different strategy. I used more of a keto and intermittent fasting approach for my second journey. And the social media climate was totally different in 2020 versus 2011. Like 2011, there was Facebook and YouTube. There was no live streaming. There was no like Insta stories or TikTok. There was none of that. So a lot of people didn't even see it like as it was happening because there was like a couple videos per week on YouTube. There was Facebook posts every day, but it was like, there wasn't videos. It was like pictures or whatever it was. So people couldn't really see it in a day in the life. And so when I did it in 2020 with all the other different types of social media platforms we have, people really got a glimpse into like the day-to-day roller coaster of emotions, the ups and downs. And they really got to see a glimpse of like, wow, this is how it affected him psychologically, physically, his family life and all of that. Like people got an in-depth look into just how hard it was for me and how humbling it was. Even though the second time around, I'll be totally honest with you, I did a lot of inner work on myself, went to therapy after my divorce and leaving my religion and deconstructed a lot of things. So I was in a good place emotionally. So the second time around, I had no problem taking my shirt off. I was not self-conscious at all. I totally rocked the dad bod. Like I knew that like this was just a temporary phase of my body being heavier, carrying a little bit extra fat. And yeah, I actually enjoyed it a lot more, to be honest with you. So, because I knew my body would bounce back. I knew from experience that I would get back, but it was humbling in different ways. It was way harder in different ways. I would say one, because of the breakup, but two, just being older and my daughters being older. And, I promised them I would never do it again because they didn't like who I was. I was not you're not the nicest person when you're sleep deprived and your hormones are all out of whack and your cortisol's elevated through the roof. Like, you're not the best version of you as a dad, as a boyfriend, as a human when you're not taking care of your physical health. And so I think it opened up a lot of people's eyes to just how important it is. Like, your physical health affects your mental and emotional health and spiritual health, and vice versa. So I think people got to see the parallels, the correlation between all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one misnomer, or I don't know if it's a misnomer, but like a myth, I call it a myth that I hear all the time is,
Sure.
oh, I'm too old, right? Like, I'm over the hill. I'm too old. This is not going to work for me. Or, this is just the way it's supposed to be, or whatever it is, right? Like, people don't think that in their 40s or in their 50s that they'll even be capable of losing the weight that they want to lose and building muscle on top of that. What do you think about that?
Yeah. It's one of those beliefs that, I think a lot of people adopt at some point in time. And, if they believe that that's their reality and that's their truth, then that's what their belief system is going to be. And do I believe that? Is that my truth? No. I think you can change at any point in your life. You can create a new version of you at any point in your life. And I'm a testament to that. Like, the version of me of who I am today, like, is completely different than who I was 10 years ago. And I think you're doing yourself a disservice because there's a lot of growth that can happen if you really get outside your self-limiting beliefs. And the problem, I think we live in a society that is, we're addicted to comfort. And there's a really good book called The Comfort Crisis. And he talks about this in the book of how comfort is literally killing us nowadays versus back in the day. Our species, we're biologically wired to seek comfort, to preserve life so we can live longer, to create comfort so that, we can live more comfortable lives. But now we live in a day and age where literally every single discomfort you have, there is a relief from that. If you're hot, turn on the air conditioning. If you're cold, turn on the heater, get the warm shower. You have warm clothes, soft clothes, a car, refrigerator, you have DoorDash and Uber Eats, and you have especially if you live in a first world country, you have access to food whenever you want to, at any time of the day. It's like, I don't know, it's something out of a dream, right? That we have access to this much food, and any kind of discomfort you have, we have a remedy for that. So now that we're biologically wired to seek comfort and we live in a world of all these comforts, now comfort is killing us, because if you want to get in shape, guess what? You got to get uncomfortable. If you want to gain wealth, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. Any kind of positive change you want in your life, you're going to have to get uncomfortable. The problem is that you've been a creature of comfort for so long. Now exercising is too uncomfortable. Like moving your body, like having like sweat and, breathing heavily and, your muscles burning, like people are like, oh, that's too hard. That's too hard. Oh, eating healthy food, that's too hard. Like that's too uncomfortable for me. I can't do that. Or like taking a cold shower, or, these little discomforts that, or even just walking out in nature, like going for a hike in nature. People are like, oh, it's too uncomfortable. Right. And so, it's not anyone's fault, but I'm just saying we're products of our environment. And this is why it's so hard for people to change, because we've become so accustomed to all the comforts that are available to us in our modern day and age that, to get people to change is really hard, because we're just so used to all these comforts. We're becoming like the people in WALL-E. Remember that movie with the little robot where they go to outer space and they don't move their bodies anymore because they don't need to. They just kind of have everything fed to them and brought to them, and they're just have the screen in front of their face. And, and so that's kind of what we're becoming, because a lot of people don't need to move their bodies. You could literally stay in your room all day long, have food delivered to you. You don't need to leave the house ever if you didn't want to,
Sounds terrible. It's like a nightmare.
But that's people's reality. It's certain people's reality of like, yeah, like maybe I'm too old. And, you can't force someone to change. You can't convince them they need to change. They need to have an experience that kind of wakes them up to be like, oh, I need to change. And that's where I've kind of let go of like preaching to people that they need to change. Cause it's almost like I see it as religion. people see this healthy, fit way of living. It's brought so much good into their life. They want to preach that to others and convert people like, hey, if you take care of your body, you're going to feel better. You're going to be better. Like, and yes, there's some truth to that. But also if someone doesn't want that, they don't want it forced down their throat, right? They don't want it preached to them like, hey, you need to eat less. You need to work out. Like, some people just don't want to change, and that's their prerogative and that's their choice. And like, there's no moral high ground in my opinion of like, oh, you're less than because you don't exercise, you don't have 5% body fat. Like, I don't believe that anymore.
I think it has to get so bad. It has to become so uncomfortable and so painful and so scary to the point where you almost feel like if I don't change, I'm going to die. I think that's pretty much where that change happens, right? You almost have no choice because staying in the comfort zone is now become uncomfortable. And I think that's a lot of times where people will make the change almost because they just can't continue. And I was one of those people, like I didn't really care about the vanity of it. I was having 2 kids. I was busy. I had work. I had all these other priorities. And little by little, it all kind of slips away. And, you enter your 40s and you're like, oh, yeah, I mean, that's just a fantasy. Like, I can't really get myself back in shape. It doesn't even matter. But then one day you wake up and you find yourself in the hospital, or you're having a lot of health problems, right? Or you think you're having a heart attack and you have to see a cardiologist. That's when things kind of clicked for me. And I was like, oh, right. Maybe those 80 pounds need to come off. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat.
Yeah, and that's why transformation is so difficult for so many people. Because let's say you are at that stage of life, and let's say you're 60 years old. So you have 60 years of your brain being programmed a certain way to seek comfort in a certain way. And now it's like, all right, now I have to radically shift and create a new identity to make this fitness a part of my life. And to do all that is not as simple as just like doing it. For some people, there might be like a few people that can just willpower their way to a new healthy lifestyle. But for other people, they're going to have to deconstruct the way they think, the way they respond to a stimulus, the way they respond to triggers and stressors in their life differently. They're going to have to be trained in a different way. They have to create a new mindset. They have to create a new identity, create new neural pathways to respond to triggers differently. So like, instead of reaching for the food when they get into a fight, or they reach for the alcohol if they're like, their kids are stressing them out or whatever, there's different coping mechanisms. There's different tools available to people. And this is what I teach people now, is to give them a bunch of tools in their tool belt that they have available to them to help them regulate their emotions so that they're not just, reactive all the time. And when we're reactive, what happens is, there's stimulus, there's triggers, and then there's reactions to those stimulus or those triggers. And the more space you can create between stimulus happening and your reaction, the more space you have, the more power you have to choose. The problem is people don't create space. They have a trigger and then they react because that's your brain on autopilot. That's what we've been doing for the past, decades. And so to create space, how do you do that? You have to be more mindful. You have to be more present. You have to be more self-aware. You have to be more observant of yourself and your actions. And so like, I do a deep dive with people into their psyche of creating space. So things like breath work and meditation and talk therapy and life coaching and journaling and a gratitude practice and, getting out in nature. There's a lot of different methods or tools that can help to create space so that then you can choose your course of action after your triggers, so you're not just reactive all the time. And that's training your brain to become more of the observer of your thoughts versus you are your thoughts. And so that takes time. That takes time to teach your brain how to do that in these situations. But that's why the way I help people is more of what I call a conscious fitness approach. So instead of just giving them workouts and meal plans and supplements to take, because all that's important, but if they don't understand their psychology of why they do what they do, then they're just going to repeat those patterns. Even if I give them the perfect meal plan to follow or the perfect workout program, like none of that matters until they figure this part out. And so that's why I help people a lot with like learning how to meditate, learning how to breathe, learning how to journal, learning how to like reach out for help, learning how to move their body to move that energy through them. So whether it's through working out or dancing or breath work or some type of physical movement to regulate those emotions and those reactions, then it's easier for them to navigate that journey of not being as reactive. And so there's a couple books that I would recommend to people. One is called What Happened to You. It's a good book by Oprah. She talks more about, understanding yourself, of why you are the way you are and why you do what you do, and having more empathy for you and understanding where these things first stem from and figuring out like, oh, okay, like I understand now, like when I was a kid, this happened and then my mom would give me food or I reach for food in this situation or whatever it is, like deconstructing all that and connecting the dots of why you became this version of you. There's some other good books I would recommend. The Four Agreements, The Mastery of Self by Don Miguel Ruiz are really good books as well. But things like, talk therapy and counseling, life coaching can help deconstruct these thoughts. And that's why working in, like I talked about, is just as important as working out.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a quote, I can't remember who originally said it, but it goes something like, the highest form of intelligence is observing yourself without judgment. And I understood what that finally meant when I became curious about whatever it is that was going on. Because, there's a lot of chaos that goes on inside of us, right? Especially like when you're going through something profound, like a transformation of any kind. Really, it could be a life transformation, it could be a relationship transformation, weight loss, job, anything, right? There's a lot of chaos that comes before the creation process before it manifests itself into our physical reality. So I thought that was really interesting, because when you do become aware and you start to see yourself from a distance, things don't seem that dire. Like they don't seem that intense, like you don't have to react to all of it. You can just kind of let it go.
Yeah,
there's the feeling.
That's why meditation practice is really good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. So, where can people find you?
Yeah, super simple. So my brand is fit, fat, fit. And that's all my social media handles. That's my website. It's my podcast. It's my first book. So just Google Drew Manning, Fit to Fat to Fit, or just fittofattofit.com, or just look me up on Insta or Facebook or Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, all the things, Fit to Fat to Fit.
Absolutely amazing conversation. I have one more question.
Sure.
What would you tell someone that is just now starting their transformation and they have failed over and over and over and over again? What would you say to them to kind of push them over the edge to be successful this time?
Yeah, I would tell them that you are worthy no matter how many times you've tried. You are worthy to keep fighting because you're worthy of good physical health. You're worthy of good emotional and spiritual health, and to keep fighting and to learn how to operate out of a place of self-love versus self-hate. Because I think self-hate can only get you so far. You can try and hate your body to skinny, and that might work for some people for a season or two. But if you want lasting, fulfilling change in your life, it has to come from a place of self-acceptance and self-love. And you've probably tried self-hate your entire life. So try operating at a place of self-love, like learn how to love yourself as you are, as imperfect as your body is, or wherever your starting point is. Try and love yourself the way you are now. And as you work on, a better version of yourself, give yourself that love and use that self-love as motivation, because I think self-love can be just as motivating to want to improve our life as self-hate can, but feel so much better along the journey. You're going to enjoy the journey so much more if you could operate out of a place of self-love. And this is coming from someone who, yes, I grew up hating myself, even though I had, a good-looking body. There was other parts of me that I hated. We all have parts of us that we tend to hate or wish away. But once I learned how to love myself, everything changed. Like the journey of life is so much more enjoyable. And I would say invest into, tools or ways of learning how to love yourself as you are. And self-love doesn't mean you're complacent. Self-love doesn't mean you aren't going to do hard things. If you truly love yourself, you can still do the hard things that are required because you realize that you're worthy of the results that those hard things are going to bring into your life. And that's true self-love, is like, I love myself enough to do this hard thing, which is in the moment hard and difficult, but this hard thing is going to bring X, Y, and Z into my life. And I'm worthy of those things that it's going to bring into my life. And that's where, you start to look at these things not as a chore or a punishment. You start to look at these things as like, oh, I'm worthy of this. I'm worthy of working out. I'm worthy of eating healthy food. I'm worthy of having good physical health and good sleep and good digestion and good skin and good sex and good energy and good all the things. Like, you're worthy of that. And use that as motivation to push yourself to do the hard things, the uncomfortable things that are required to bring about the change that you desire in your life.
I think that's incredible and amazing advice. Thank you, Drew. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Yeah. This was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any comments or feedback, please leave it in the comments section. You can find more episodes on all platforms and on our website, thehouseofrose.com. How Good Can It Get podcast is powered and produced by Social Fix Media. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.